where we make comments in a section. Today, in this segment or section of a comment section, I read a chapter from French Feminism, Powers of Horror, an essay on abjection by Julia Kristeva. I'm gonna go ahead and this is what we're gonna be reading. We are going to read chapter 2. Something to be scared of. A regal soul inadvertently surrendering to the crab of lust, the octopus of weak-mindedness, the shark of an individual abjection, the boa of absent morality, the monstrous snail of idiocracy. This was a quote said by La Tremont Les Champs de Maldoror. Continuing. The object as trimming of anguish. When psychoanalysts speak of an object, they speak of the object of desire as it is elaborated within the Epidian triangle. According to that trope, the father is the mainstay of the law, and the mother the prototype of the object. Toward the mother, there is conversion not only of survival needs, but of the first mimetic yearnings. She is the other subject, an object that guarantees my being as subject. The mother is my first object, both desiring and signifiable. No sooner sketched out, such a thesis is exploded by its contradictions and flimsiness. Do we not find sooner, if not objects, at least pre-objects, pose of attraction of a demand for air, food, and motion? Do we not also find in the very process that constitutes the mother as other a series of semi-objects that stake out the transition from a state of indifferentiation to one of discretion, semi-objects that are called precisely transitional by Winnicott? Finally, do we find a whole gradation within modalities of separation, a real deprivation of the beast, an imaginary frustration of the gift as maternal relation, and to conclude, a symbolic castration inscribed in the Oedipus complex, a gradation constituting in Lycan's brilliant formulation object relation insofar as it is always a means of masking, of parrying the fundamental fund of anguish. The matter of the object sets in motion or implicates the entire Freudian structure, narcissism. Beginning with what or when does it allow itself to be exceeded by sexual drive? Which is drive toward the other. Repression. What type of repression yields symbolization, hence a signifiable object? And what other type is contrary, blocks the way toward symbolism, topples the drive? This is really boring, right? It topples drive into lack of object, of a symbolia or the auto object of somatization. The connection between the unconscious and language. What is the share of language, learning, or language activity in the constitution of object relation in its transformations? It is with respect to the phobia of little Hans that Freud tackles in the clearest fashion the matter of the relation to the object, which is crucial for the constitution of the subject. From the start, fear and object are linked. Can that be by accident? The unending and uncertain identifications of hysterics did surely not draw light on Freud's work. On this topic, this obsessional rumination will ceaselessly elaborate signs so as better to protect within the family vault a sacred object that is missing, was probably of greater avail to him in dealing with the question. But why is it phobia that best allows one to tackle the matter of relation to the object? Why fear an object? Confronted with states of distress that are evoked for us by the child who makes himself heard but is incapable of making himself understood, we adults use the word fear. Birth trauma. According to Autorank, or the upsetting of the balance of drive integration elaborated by the maternal receptacle in the course of uterine life, and by good mothering, are theoretical artifacts that rationalize a zero state of the subject, and probably a zero state of the theory, as confronted with what the children had not uttered. Fear, therefore, is in a first sense, could be upsetting of a bio-drive balance. The constitution of object relation might then be a reiteration of fear, alternating with optional but precarious states of balance. Fear and object proceed together until the one represses the other, but in which one of us is that fully successful. Hans is afraid of the unnameable, and yet the fear of which one can speak, the one therefore that has a signifiable object, is a more belated and more logical product that assumes all earlier alarms are archaic, non-representable fear, spoken fear, hence subsequent to language, and necessarily caught in an Oedipus structure. Is as close as the fear of an unlikely object that turns out to be the substitute for another object. That is what Freud believes when he hears the story of little Hans, who is afraid of horses. He detects the fear of castration, of his mother's missing sexual organ, of the losses of his own, of the guilty desire to reduce the father to some unmanning, or to the same death, and so forth. This is astonishingly true, and not quite so. What is striking in the case of Hans, as little as he might be, what Freud does not cease to be astonished by, is his stupendous verbal skill. He assimilates and reproduces language with impressive eagerness and talent. So eager is he to name everything that he runs into the unnameable. Street sounds, that ceaseless trade activity involving horses in front of the house. The intensity with which his father, a recent convert to psychoanalysis, is interested in his body. His love for small girls, the stories and fantasies that he sexualizes to the utmost. the somewhat elusive, somewhat frail presence of his mother. All of this, which has already considerable sense for Hans without having found its significance, is doubtless distributed, as Freud says, between narcissistic conventional drive and sexual drive. It all becomes necessarily crystallized in the epistemophilia experience of Hans, who wants to know himself and to know everything, to know in particular what seems to be lacking in his mother or could be lacking in himself. More generally, however, the phobia of horses becomes a hieroglyph that condenses all fear from unnameable to nameable. For archaic fears that accompany language learning at the same time as familiarization with the body, the street, animals, people. The statement to be afraid of horses is a hieroglyph having the logic of metaphor and hallucination. By means of the signifier of the phobic object, the horse, it calls attention to a drive, economy, and want of an object. The conglomerate of fear, deprivation, and nameless frustration, which, properly speaking, belongs to the unnameable, the phobic object shows up at the place of non-objective states of drive and assumes all the mishaps of drive as disappointed desires or as desire diverted from their objects. The metaphor that is taxed with representing want itself is constituted under the influence of symbolizing agency. That symbolic law is not necessarily the superego type, but it is also seeped into the ego and the ideal of ego. Phobia as abortive metaphor of want. Metaphor of want as such, phobia bears the mark of fragility. The subject's signifying system. It must be perceived that such a metaphor is described not in verbal rhetoric, but in the heterogeneity of the psychic system that is made up of drive, presentations, and thing presentations linked to word presentations. The infancy of little Hans does not entirely explain the frailty of the signifying system that forces metaphor to turn into drive. And conversely, one must also conclude, and phobic adults confirm this, that within the symbolic law accruing the function of the father, something remains blurred in the Oedipal triangle constituting the subject. Does Hans' father not play a bit too much the role of mother whom he dressed into the shadows? Does he not overly seek the surety of the professor? If phobia is a metaphor that has mistaken its place, forsaking language for drive and sight, it is because a father does not hold his own, be he the father of the subject or the father of his mother. Freud understands this perfectly after the first accounts by Hans' father. He suggests to such a Hermes that he remembers himself that his son, in trying, if only by means of his mustache and pince-nez, to take the horse's place. The treatment obviously succeeded, up to a point at any rate, for Hans play alone and ventures to produce other metaphors of his fear, of the unnameable in the framework of a rhetoric that on occasion clears itself of drive, or better, hysterizes it. Fear, as a matter of fact, retreats to the benefit of a loading for a raspberry syrup, the color of which alone evokes the edge of a gas. But has phobia really disappeared? It does not seem to have, for at least two reasons. First, the Freudian treatment by referring to the auspices of the family triangle. What have we seen to be a fear of the unnameable, fear of want and of castration, actually revives the phobia. treatment justifies the phobic trial. Freud tells Hans that he is right. You cannot be afraid of castration, and upon your fear, I found the truth of theory. In so doing, he rationalizes that fear, and even though such rationalization is also in effect because of transference and elaboration, it remains in part of an anticathexis of phobia. A certain handling of the analytic cure runs the risk of being nothing else but a counterphobic treatment. If that cure remains at the level of fantasy, does not enter, having traversed the latter, into the more subtle workings of the metaphoric elaboration constituted by the statement on the phobic object, to the extent that this object is representative of drive, and not of an already present object. Indeed, as Freud is first to admit, the analytical apparatus is no match for that phobic condensation, for it cannot open it out. In the process of the formation of a phobia, from the unconscious thoughts underlying it, condensation takes place, and for that reason, the course of analysis can never follow that of the development of the neurosis. Obviously, such an acknowledgement does no more than establish the difference between the analytic process and the neurotic condensation process. But one could also understand it as neglecting. Drew the linear, transferential approach of analysis. The processes of condensation that oversee phobic work. In order to deal with such processes, it would be necessary to revive the work of introjection, as well as to pay attention to displacements and condensations within the signifying chain. On the other hand, taking the metaphoricalness into account would amount to considering the phobic person as a subject in want of metaphoricalness, incapable of producing metaphors by means of signs alone. He produces them in the very material of drives, and it turns out that the only rhetoric of which he is capable is that of effect, and it is projected as often as not by means of images. It will then fall upon analysis to give back a memory, hence a language, to the unnameable and the nameable states of fear, while emphasizing the former, which make up what the most unapproachable in the unconscious. It will also fall upon it within the temporality and same logic, and to make the analysis see the void upon which rests the play, with the signifier in primary processes. Such a void in the arbitrariness of that play are the truest equivalents of fear. But does it not amount to diverting the analytic process towards literature or even stylistics? Is this not asking the analyst to be rhetorical, to write instead of interpreting? Does this not also imply holding a fetishist scream that of the word before a dissolving fear? The fetishist episode peculiar to the unfolding of phobia is well known. It is perhaps unavoidable that when a subject confronts the fetishishness of object relation, when he stands at the place of the want that he founds it, the fetish becomes a life preserver, temporary and slippery, but nonetheless indispensable. But is that not exactly language, our ultimate and inseparable fetish? And language precisely is based on a fetishistic denial, and defines us in our essence as speaking beings. Because of its founding status, the fetishism of language is perhaps the only one that is unanalyzable. One might then view writing or art in general not as the only treatment, but as the only know-how where phobia is concerned. Little Hans has become stage director for an opera house. Finally, and this is the second reason why phobia does not disappear but slides beneath language. The phobic object is a proto-writing, and conversely, any practice of speech, inasmuch as it involves writing, is a language of fear. I mean, a language of want as such. The want that positions signs the subject and object, not the language of the desiring exchange of messages or objects that are transmitted in a social contract of communication and desire beyond want, but a language of want, of the fear that edges up to it and runs along its edges. The one who tries to utter this, not yet a place, this no grounds, can obviously only do so backwards, starting from an overtly mastery of the linguistic and rhetorical code. But in the last analysis, he refers to fear, a terrifying abject referent. We encounter this discourse in our dreams, when death brushes us by, depriving us of the assurance mechanical use of speech ordinarily gives us the assurance of being ourselves. That is, untouchable, unchallengeable, immortal. But the writer is permanently confronted with such a language. The writer is a phobic who succeeds in metaphorizing in order to keep from being frightened to death. Instead, he comes to life again in signs. I am afraid of being bitten, or I am afraid of biting. Nevertheless, does fear not hide in aggression, a violence that returns to its source? Its sign having been inverted, what was there in the beginning? Want, deprivation, original fear, or the violence of rejection? Aggressivity, the deadly death drive? Freud abandoned the vicious cycle of cause and effect of the chicken and the egg by discovering a complex being completely alien to the angelism of the Rousseauistic child. At the same time as the Oedipus complex, he discovers infantile, perverse, polymorphic sexuality, already a carrier of desire and death. But, and this is masterstroke, he accompanied that given with a completely symbolic causality that not only balances it, but destroys it as fundamental determinism. I refer to the modeling and in the final analysis, determining role of symbolic language relation. From the deprivation felt by the child because of the mother's absence is the paternal prohibitions that institute symbolism. That relation accompanies, forms, and elaborates an aggressivity of drives, which consequently never presents itself in a pure state. Let me say, then, that want and aggressivity are chronologically, separately, but logically coextensive. Aggressivity appears to us as a rejoinder to the original deprivation felt from the time of the mirage, known as the primary narcissism. It merely takes revenge on initial frustrations, but what can be known of their connection is that want, aggressivity are to one another. To speak of want alone is to repudiate aggressivity in obsessional fashion. To speak aggressivity alone, forgetting want, amounts to making transference paranoidal. I am afraid of horses. I am afraid of getting bitten. Fear and aggressivity intended to protect me from some, yet not localizable cause are projected and come back to me from the outside. I am threatened. The fantasy of incorporation by means of which I attempt to escape fear threatens me nonetheless, for a symbolic paternal prohibition already dwells in me on account of my learning to speak at the same time. In the face of that second threat, a completely symbolic one, I attempt another procedure. I am not the one that devours, I am the one being devoured by him. A third person, therefore, is devouring me. Passivation. A syntactical passivation which heralds the subject's ability to put himself in the place of the object is a radical stage in the constitution of subjectivity. What a fuss was made over a child as being bitten. What efforts asserted to write passive sentences in those languages that have such a mood. I should point out here that the logic of constitution of the phobic object is also requires such a procedure of passivation in parallel fashion to the setting up of the signifying function phobia, which also functions under the aegis of censorship and repression, displacing by inverting the signs before metaphorizing. Only after such an inversion can the horse or the dog become the metaphor of my empty incorporating mouth, which ushers me threatening from the outside. Overdetermined, like all metaphors, this horse, this dog also contains speed, racing, flight, motion, the street, traffic, cars, walking, an entire world of others toward which they escape, and where, in order to save myself, I try to escape, but rendered culpable, abashed, I come back, I withdraw, I meet with anguish again. I am afraid of what? This sort of question appears only at that moment, laden with all the meanings of object and pre-object relations, with all its weight for a correlative ego, and not as an empty sign. This means that an object that is hallucination is being made up. The phobic object is a complex elaboration, already comprising logical and linguistic workings that are attempts at drive. Introjection, outlining the failure to introject that which is incorporated. If incorporation marks out the way towards constitution of the object, phobia represents the failure of the concomitant drive introjection. Devouring language. The phobia of a little girl discussed during an Anefoy seminar gives us the opportunity to measure the importance of orality, not morality. This book literally says the word orality, O-R-A-L-I-T-Y. Now back to the text in this matter. The fact that it is a girl who is afraid of being eaten up by a dog is perhaps not without importance of the emphasis of orality and passivation. Moreover, the phobia follow upon a separation from a mother and a reunion when the mother already belonged to another. Curiously, the more phobic Sandy got, the more she spoke. The observer noted, as a matter of fact, that she spoke with a rural accent, that she was talkative, that at the age of 3.5, she talks a lot, adds an extensive vocabulary, expresses herself at ease, and enjoys repeating strange and difficult words. Drew the mouth that I fill with words instead of my mother, whom I miss from now on more than ever. I elaborate that want and aggressivity that accompanies it by saying it turns out, under the circumstances, oral activity which produces the linguistic signifier coincides with the theme of devouring, which the dog metaphor has a first claim on. But the one is rightfully led to suppose that any verbalizing activity, whether or not it names a phobic object related to orality, is an attempt to interject incorporated items. in that sense, verbalization has always been confronted with the object. That the phobic object language learning takes place as an attempt inappropriate in all object that slips away and whose hallucinations necessarily deform, threatens us from the outside. Sandy's increasing interest in language and appropriation in proportion as her phobia grows. The verbal games in which she indulges are on par with the intense verbal activity of little Hans, which I discussed. One might contrast with this relation between phobia and language in the child commonplace observation on adult phobic discourse. The speech of a phobic adult is also characterized by extreme nimbleness, but the vertiginous skill is as if void of meaning, traveling at top speed over an untouched and untouchable abyss, of which, on occasion, only the affect shows up, giving not a sign, but a signal. It happens because language has become counterphobic object. It no longer plays the role of element of miscarried interjection, capable in the child's phobia of revealing the anguish of original wants. In analyzing those structures, one is led to dread one's way through the meshes of the non-spoken in order to get at the meaning of such a strong barricade in discourse. The child undergoing a phobic episode has not reached that point. His symptom, because he utters it, is already an elaboration of phobia. By means of logical and linguistic work he undertakes at the same time, his symptom arrives at a complex and ambiguous elaboration. A phobic hallucination then stands halfway between the recognition of desire and counterphobic construction, not yet a defensive, overcoded discourse that knows too much and manipulates its objects wonderfully. Oh my God. I can't do it, guys. I tried. I just cannot read this essay. Powers of Horror by Julia Kristeva. French Feminism. Who can read this? Who the fuck can read this shit? I cannot stand it. Shit. What the hell was I reading? Oh my God. I hate Floyd. I hate Oedipus. I hate all this shit. Get it out of my head. Why are the fucking French philosophers always up their own ass like this? Seriously, they are up their own ass. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. Absolutely crazy. Absolutely madness. I just don't get it. I don't think I'll ever get it. I don't think I understand it either. Honestly, I really don't get it. I just... Whew, what in the world was I reading? What was I reading? What was going through my head as I read that? Like literally. Well, You now I got to see what life was like through my ears or eyes. How does that work? Damn. Okay, I'm about to end this broadcast.